Hello. Do you feel your students are not that excited when it comes to reading? By reading here, I mean the one we work in class during our lessons or at home for fun, especially in English. What if you had the chance of engaging more of your students to like reading by going along with some practical tips and ideas that will encourage your students, encourage them to feel more confident and motivated? Welcome everyone to one more Bilingual Voices. I'm Sergio Almeida, academic consultant for the Richmond team. Today we have the pleasure of hosting a distinguished guest, Professor Adolfo Tanzi Neto, a very experienced professional in the field of English language teaching. I invite you all to join us as we get on a journey to explore the power of reading and how we can help students become better readers. To interact with us, to interact with our presentation, please use our live chat. We'll be glad to answer your questions. The link for our customer satisfaction survey and certificate will be sent later. Okay. Professor Adolfo, thanks a lot for joining us today. We all know as teachers how challenging it is to get our students more and more devoted to reading in general. Why do you think this is happening nowadays?
Hello to everyone. It's just an honor to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And hopefully we're going to have, an interesting talk and share some ideas and perspectives about teaching in terms of reading and thinking of reading comprehension. And there's a specific skills that we know that's not an easy skill to work in class. So I think I would like to start, Sergio, with the idea for us to discuss a little bit about what is language. Because what happens is when we go to reading, when we start working with reading class, we tend to, and I do get into this place too, is that we were very concerned about the preparation of that reading. Like, do my students know all the vocabulary? Are they ready to get in contact with that specific genre? Is this the right time to work with reading in my lesson plan? So I think all these questions are all the time around us, and we keep on asking ourselves. And that's why I think it's important for us to start thinking about what language, how can we describe language? So, and to do that, I would like to go to a more disruptive way of thinking of language. So first of all, we have to understand that language is not only what is written. So let's think about language is also an image. Language is also a meme, which is very much used by our students. Language could be, a very short extract of a video. I mean, the whole video could be language, but I'm saying that it can have a specific idea to transmit to the messenger or to transmit to people a very short extract of a video, for example. So we can open our mind in terms of what language is about, like thinking of, I don't like to get into terms, academic terms, but we would call this in our areas as a multimodal ways of thinking of language. For example, all this image, sounds, color, all this we consider language. So saying that, what happens when we get into reading, we become very good, I would say, in a very nice way, I would say, because I put myself in that place too. We become very good language dissector. What do I mean by that? Is that we tend to dissect language. So we get sentences, we get words and vocabulary, mainly because our readers, sometimes most of them that we use with our students, they are prepared for students. So we have readers that we use quite a lot inside of our classroom, which is very useful, and there is a specific purpose for that. I'm working with basic students, so then I need a text that's more elaborated for beginners, and then for intermediate students, for advanced students. But the problem of that is that when we get into this idea of reading in terms of understanding sentences, understanding just words, so what happens to that we tend to pretty much cue language. Yes. So, and I think that we could get into the idea that reading, the first step of thinking of working with reading inside of classroom, is to think of how we can make language not be dissected, but be very close to social practice. For example, where do I use that language? How can we make that language come to life? How can I make sentences and pages and everything that is structured there come to life? And this is a very big challenge for our students, because we know sometimes that we're working with different ages, we're working with different levels inside of classrooms. Some students are more into reading, some students just hate reading. So, and then the basic idea here is how can we prepare our students to get in contact with that specific reading. But this preparation is not preparing students with vocabulary, which is very useful, and I think is also part of it. Worry that we have as a teacher in terms of not frustrating our students in terms of getting a very difficult text and feel very frustrated because I don't understand much what's being said here, what's going on in the story. But the idea of working in the pre-reading, I would say, thinking of the reading as a terms of looking at all these languages. For example, I'm going to work with a book that talks about, a specific horror story, for example. And I can start my pre-reading, for example, showing students a picture. And they can look at the picture and describe that picture. Yes, Sergio.
And let me just interrupt you, because I've got one point that I'd like you to clarify before you go ahead with your saying. The thing is, do you think that culturally speaking, we also face a problem to have people reading? Because I see students don't even read in Portuguese. So I think we have to go one step back and think about this. Do you think that culturally speaking, we have this problem, we have this issue here in Brazil?
Yeah, again, we can think about what we read, because if you think about, like, when I'm in the social media, when I'm looking into pictures and I'm looking into TikToks and I'm looking into tweets, for example, I'm reading a specific genre. I'm reading. I'm getting contact with language. What happens is that sometimes our students are more used to this kind of reading, reading short sentences. For example, tweets are very short. Reading, for example, images and reading videos and reading audios, I would say, not just listening, but because there is a way for us to think as a reading process too. But that traditional reading in terms of what is written on pages as a book, organized as a book, is something that culturally, as you put, it is a problem in Brazil. We are not, it's something that we work quite a lot in terms of asking our students and convincing our students to also try that specific way of using language, which is the written form. So
I see.
Yeah, so I think that's the challenge for us is how we turn this, this traditional reading, this traditional way of communicating, into something that is pleasurable for our students, something that they can feel comfortable in participating in engaging in that specific task. So I think that's our our one of the biggest challenge when we involve this kind of reading. And that's why I just get back to why I decided to start talking about language, because one way of engaging them is making this other way around. We could start working with these other ways of communicating, for example, using images, sounds, and short videos to get our students prepared to that specific reader, for example. Because what happens is when we, one of the basic, I think, tasks we ask our students when we are preparing them for that specific reader, we ask them questions about, oh, have you ever read an horror story? Have you ever, do you like horror films? And then we get much into the oral part, discussing with them about the reader, and then we just jump into reading something. The idea here is, in terms of thinking of how we can engage students, is maybe we could read other stuff. Maybe we could read some horror images. Maybe we could read some or I don't know, just thinking of how we can find different ways of different languages, and then maybe then we make that bridge to read written stuff in terms of the readers. I'm just getting to the more traditional organization of a text. Yes.
Exactly. This was going to be my next point, because in our in the classroom, when we're working with reading, we have two types of readings that may happen in the classroom. I'd like you to talk a bit about the difference between having a short text inside the classroom with one specific task, and having your students reading at home, for example, having a task at home. Can you please give examples and explain a bit more the difference between these two different reading methods, let's say?
Yes, sure. So what we have, from I think the 80s to up to now, is we divided, reading into two ways of thinking in terms of a lesson plan. Yes. So we can think of extensive reading, which we're talking about reading for enjoyment. This is not just like in terms of, okay, this is just for fun, I'm not going to ask students anything about it. No, we're talking about it's extensive because it's for enjoyment, but it's also for them to develop skills and abilities in terms of reading longer stuff and having
in a more natural way, let's say.
In a more natural way, exactly. So, and then this is also important, Sergio, because sometimes teachers feel very insecure in terms of using extensive reading, because they do think that we have to prepare them for their extensive reading. And no, the idea is that they can experience language. And let's think about, for example, when we travel, and this could be to any country. Let's think about countries that language. I was in Russia last year, and I've been to Russia quite a lot because I have some projects there, and it's always it's a challenge for me, the language. And sometimes I go to very distant cities, and I get in the airport, I get pamphlets, I see, I visit church, and I see, sometimes I get those papers, with rhymes and stuff, and when I'm in that situation, I remember when I was an English student. It's because we are there, not controlled, because I don't have a Russian teacher behind me or a Russian teacher giving me pre-reading and while and post-reading. So I'm there by myself, and I have to find my own skills and my own way of trying to sort out that problem. So the idea of giving extensive reading to our students, and first of all, is to let them experience language more, in a freer way, more freely, and also to give them the chance to build the autonomy of reading, because reading also needs, we need to become autonomous. Reading is not an easy task, even for our L1 language. It's even difficult for us Portuguese speakers, and when we are in the process of learning Portuguese inside of a school. So if it's difficult for us, when we're learning our first language, imagine for additional language. So this challenge is always there. But the idea is that when we give them the chance to go to extensive reading, I mean, this part, just giving this example, that's for enjoyment. I can also, for sure, I can ask them questions, general questions about the text. What were the impressions? How many, did you like, any character specifically? So I can make a broader discussions with them about that book or reader or text that they had the chance to go to a more extensive, as we call, an extensive reading. So, but Adolfo, can I make a preparation for the extensive reading, because they're gonna read? I don't know. I'm just asking them to read the book through their holidays or vacation. So, is there a way I can make some? Yes, we can put in our lesson plan some discussions and prepare them for the reader that's gonna come. That's gonna be reading, not in the school, and then after they come back from holidays or vacation, you're gonna have a discussion with them. So yeah, we can make it, but the idea is that don't feel insecure, or don't feel that we should not give them the chance to experiment language. And sometimes it's going to be a challenge, because yes, you're not going to be there, vocabulary is going to be difficult sometimes, and the idea is that when they start using some of the tools that we tell them quite a lot, like we have to try to understand by the context. We have to read the whole paragraph and see, how much of, how much you can understand from that specific paragraph, not read word by word and try to translate. So all these things we do inside of classroom. So when we give them the chance for extensive reading, we give them the chance because we do that. We try to tell our students that we sometimes get, like when we get a text, for example, from economics, it's very hard for us, even though we are, we speak English fluently. We are, we teach that language. But what we do, we try to read a paragraph and try to understand the paragraph and try to understand the numbers. So we go from some skills. That what I do, for example, when I'm in Russia, I try to see, okay, this is a date. There are some words that I know already. So I do some inference. I try to, get the idea of that, just trying to use some of the skills I've learned when I'm reading Portuguese, when I'm reading in English and any other language. And the other, I think,
Sorry, let me just ask you something very interesting. In my daily routine with teachers at schools, I feel they need evidence of learning from students. For example, if they have that short text in the book, students want to make sure they got it right, because there is also a task after that. And teachers want to have these answers as evidence of learning so they can move on. So my question is, in terms of extensive reading, so students are assigned a title, they have to read at home. So how can the teacher, I'd like to talk a little about how can the teacher, in your opinion, in your view, have evidence that they are getting the story, they are getting the message, and they are doing what you said, inferring from context. So what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's different. I think the next topic we're going to talk about intensive reading. I think it's different because the task, as I said, the task is going to be broader. I mean, you're going to be asking, for example, okay, on page 240, there's something that happens there, and I would like you guys to discuss this. So because then you make it very specific, and then you turn this reading not so broad as the extensive reading proposed. So, but the idea is that whatever you want to get from the student, it should be something that's more general. So it's just like, for example, and there's also one thing, Sergio, that we have to consider is that I know the evidence is important, but the evidence of pleasure is also important. Asking them like, did you like the story? How does this story connect to your life? Is there anything that you'd like to propose, I don't know, as a different ending? So making this kind of connection with social practice, as I was saying, bringing language into life, because then the book is not just there, that was written in I don't know when, and it's going to stay there on the shelf. That book becomes part of my life, because then the teacher is asking me questions about, how did I see, did I compare my life to that? I don't know if it's a book about, a biography or something. How do you compare your life to that specific person? How was the process of reading? Did you like reading? Did you look at the dictionary all the time? you know I think that in terms of extensive reading, questions should be more into this idea of not getting specific words from the book, from the story, but then asking them about the experience, about them, how they connect to the book. Because as you said before, we have a challenge in Brazil because our culture, we tend not to read much. But again, we don't read much because language, the way we put it there, is just about rules and grammar and where sentence should be and how the first verb should be created. So we turn language into, as I said at the beginning, we became this language dissector. So we tend to present language in terms of rules. And then it's very hard for students to connect this to life because, I'm reading the text, but I'm looking into present perfect and sentences, and I'm looking into this sentence, this verb is in the past, but I'm not getting the sense of the story of how much this person is suffering, what is happening here. How could we, for example, one thing that I do quite a lot with my students in extensive reading is asking them to create a different ending, because that's pretty much interesting, because then they have to revise the characters. They have to think about, okay, so how could we change this ending? Or we could thinking of performances, asking students to, I asked also students to create, for example, an extensive reading. I asked them to create, because as they're going to read the whole book, so we have more materiality to work with them. So I asked them to create, for example, short stories. Sometimes how can we turn that book or that story in a short story, for example, of one page? So how can I tell that in one page? So this is something that they get very involved, because they feel like, okay, but we cannot forget this specific character. We have to remember that in this scenario this happened. So then they start thinking like, it's very hard to turn this, but then they get so involved in terms of and again, I mean, they're working in groups, so they share ideas. They you have students that didn't understand understood only 6%, 50% of the book, but then if they're working in pairs and they're creating a short story, so then they have a chance with their colleagues to understand the whole story and get some find stuff that happened in the stories. So for sure, I mean, you can also help them there. So there are some ideas we can do. Ask them to draw. For example, there's something very basic we can do with basic students. I love doing this because I ask them after reading, like, the whole story. It's like, okay, can you draw the story? This gets back to what I started saying, like, let's expand our vision in terms of language, because a drawing is also language. We can communicate with a drawing. I mean, it's just a way of talking. We can ask them, for example, once I asked them to create podcasts about that story. It's not an audio book, but I told them, like, can you create about, let's create a podcast about that book. So they prepared some questions, and then one of the students decided to be the writer of that story. So then they start asking, like, how did you create character X? How did you create this? Why did you think about this scenario? And then this other group of students were thinking about the answers. Why it was in the park, why it was at night, and why it was summer. So there are many things we can do in terms of extensive reading, in terms of getting what you said. I need to get some feedback that they got the idea, but I don't think that questions like what happened in the story, who died, and stuff like that gets too specific. And then we may just turn this not as an enjoyment and turn it as a task, with some, they had to deliver it language back to the teacher. So
It's a different way of checking understanding.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
a different way. It's a more indirect way. I was
Yeah.
at a school last month, and they had a project, a poster design project after reading.
Yeah.
So which was fantastic because they were third grade or something like this, and they didn't have much language to express their ideas using words, even in the written form. So
Yeah.
what they did was design this poster and explain in Portuguese what
Yeah.
they meant. So it was a fantastic way of
Yeah.
showing understanding because you only could design the poster
Yeah.
if you had read the text.
Yeah. Exactly.
Professor, one interesting thing that's a question that many teachers come to me. Uh, that is, how can we choose the level of the readers to assign to students? Because our reality in Brazil, we have mixed ability classes. So we have students that are studying in a private language school and students that have come from a background with no contact with English. So my question to you is, could you advise on something and telling how can the teacher choose the right level for the students, for the group that many times we have groups of 25, 30, even some realities, 35 students per class. So can you imagine?
Yeah. So I one thing that I when I'm getting to this situation is, first of all, is when the difference level is not that much, I tend to go higher, and because that's, for me, is my turn to get that student that's with some specific difficulties, to put to give the chance that students to move forward, and also give a little bit of challenge to the ones that are more that don't have much difficulty in terms of reading. So this is I would say, like, rule number one in terms of thinking about how to choose a specific reader. So don't go too easy, because then I think that students that like reading, or students that are more into learning second language or additional language, they're gonna get very frustrated. And don't go too higher too, because then it's going to be very difficult for the ones that are still in the process of learning how to read. What I do, Sergio, for example, when we have I had students, I had groups with with big discrepancies. For example, some students almost like fluent, and then other students in the very, I don't know, pre-intermediate level. So one thing we can do is also divide students into groups. We have this class of 40 students, or I don't know, sometimes we have like classes with 35 students. There's no need for us to ask the whole class to read the same book. We could have a chance to ask students to one group. I don't know, sometimes the book is chosen by the school, and then we got that book and come to us with our material, which is okay. We can also go give different challenges to more advanced students, and also contemplate students are in the beginning level. So the idea is if you have the possibility of because nowadays we have so many stores online and so many stuff online, we could also ask students to read different things. I could separate students that are, because I know that we try to change. I'm a very Vygotskian person, and I do understand the importance of our more capable peer. Asking. Sometimes students are more. They do like reading, and they have more repertoire of language, and then we try to ask to put that student with some students that are in the process of learning. So this is important. I'm not considering that, but sometimes we can do separate students that are very good to work with very good students, and the other ones that are still in the process, we put in another group, and then we give them different tasks. So I think we have to think about if this reading class is going to be always one to all, yes, like me and all my students, because I can divide them. I can divide into projects. For example, I can have one book for, you know, a level, whatever, like basic students, that the project has its limitations, or it has its, I don't like the word limitation, but it has, you know, there's a specific purposes for basic students. And then I can have the same book for a different group, that's going to have different tasks. You know, they're going to have to, I don't know, create more things. They're going to have, for example, to write a short story of a novel, for example, is not an easy task. So maybe this could be students that are more, you know, advanced in terms of reading and language. But then I can ask, for example, if I have in the same class students that are in a more basic level, I can ask them to draw things. I can ask them to act the story. So I can think of different activities for different levels. So we don't need to make reading as what we do with didactic book, that we have to follow the same units and we have to be at the same page, which is pretty much what we have to do with our didactic material. So the idea of having a reader, it gives us the challenge, you know, the chance to go freer, you know, to think about out of the box. Like, okay, I have this reader, which is a very nice story. So what do I do with this book? And I have students that I would like them to ask them to, they love performing. So I'm going to ask them to perform the story. Oh, I have this other group that are very much into writing things, or they are TikTokers. So I'm going to ask them to, can we create a TikTok with this story? So, or we can create TikToks from the characters. And if this character was a TikToker, what that person would publish in their social media. So there are many things we can make. As I said, we can make this language live. You know, I think that's the main for me is the main challenge for us, because if we present this as just language in sentences and structures and verbs, that's hard.
This is it, Professor. The good news is those portals and apps that bring e-readers. We've got more and more types of offer with different titles. They will bring to us the possibility of giving students the power of choosing what they want, like offering 4 or 5 titles, and they will choose 2 or 3, for example, to work, which makes this reading more authentic, because they'll be reading something they are very interested in getting to know more, and interested in knowing more about that subject. Professor, let me just leave a message here that if you have any questions or comments, please use our live chat here. And remember that the link for the customer satisfaction survey and certificate will be sent there too. So stay tuned and have a look there. Professor, our title of our presentation brings the scaffolding. How can we help students with reading comprehension? The concept of scaffolding I have read many possibilities and many definitions, and then see people using this word in our context in different ways. Could you briefly tell us what scaffolding in this scenario would be, and give examples? First, then we talk about scaffolding, so what scaffolding is in many aspects, and then we would go for scaffolding in this scenario of specifically extensive reading.
Yeah. So we the term of scaffolding comes, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the end of the 70s, which are, you know, some people, like we have Brunner, we have Wood, we have Ross, that were discussing, you know, how tutors could interact with toddlers or very young kids, like in a preschool, help them to solve problems in the process in the process of learning language, because scaffolding doesn't necessarily, you know, doesn't need to be only for reading. But so then it became very, you know, it became in vogue. You know, everybody talks about scaffolding, and there's a misunderstanding that Vygotsky said scaffolding, but no, Vygotsky never said that. Just because that people work with Vygotsky thought of scaffolding in terms of creating a space from where my students are at the moment and where I can get with them. Like, okay, I'm gonna work with this reader, for example, and I have a specific object, a specific aim, where I want to get with my students at the end of this. So then I have, where we are, as I was giving an example for this multi-level classes, so where I am with my basic students, my intermediate and my advanced students, and where I want to get at, the end of this process. So scaffolding is pretty much a way for us to look into this, where we are, where we want to get, and how we can create this structure to support students, to give them a more structured way for them to solve their problems. For them to get into this process in a more, I would say, happier way. Because reading, as I said, it's not easy for any kind of. It's not easy for L1. It's not going to be easy for L2. So reading is also, and it's interesting for us to think why reading is difficult in all languages. Reading is difficult because sometimes reading is apart from spoken language. And as I said, why our teenagers suffer so much, and the tendency is to suffer even more, because again, they're reading images, they're reading movements, they're reading performances on TikTok. So this is what's language for them. So when we get to the book, we get to something written that it's not something that they get in contact quite a lot. And then it's become even harder for them, because I think our generation, if I'm not, probably we're at the same age, our generation, we had more contact with books. Things were more, we had, like, for example, newspaper. We had the chance to get in contact with newspaper. So you think about now, for example, our newspapers online, and it's full of images and videos and etc. etc. So that's for sure is going to affect society. So,
Professor,
yeah.
Let me just go back a bit, talking about scaffolding. Please correct me. Correct me if I'm mistaken. What I could see, understand from what you said, I should look at the classroom and think of scaffolding not in terms of one reader, one project. I should look at the group and think, as readers, considering their reading proficiency, how can I take them from here to there?
Yeah.
Am I right?
Is it perfect? And we have to understand sometimes, because teachers tend to put scaffolding sometimes very structured in one lesson, which is okay. But we have to think that scaffolding could be a process. Scaffolding could take many classes, for us to be giving them structures and inputs and helping them to get to that specific skill or that specific ability in a more smooth way. Because the idea of scaffolding is that, it's just how we can help them to solve their problems throughout the process of learning. In this case, we were talking about here, reading. How can I create a process of scaffolding with my students so that they can, I don't know, at the end of the semester, at the end of the course, they could be better readers. So I think that's what we could think.
Can you please come again with this question I have just mentioned? How can I?
How can I get to my students better readers? Yes, how can they, in terms of not only just thinking of scaffolding as just one action, and making, because when you think of scaffolding in terms of the image it creates, you think of a building, and it's there. You have to think that it's there for quite a lot. It's there not for for maybe for the whole process of creating that building. So then we have to think that scaffold, and also we have to expand the idea of scaffolding. That scaffolding is not only given by the teacher. If you think of a project and students working in groups, scaffolding could also come from the more capable peers. They could also help students to pave that process of becoming better readers. And scaffolding helps quite a lot, Sergio, the process of intensive reading. Because when we get into the intensive reading, as I said, we were talking about extensive reading in a more free way, thinking about language in this big scenario. But then when we get into the intensive reading, which is very important too, because at some point we need to get with them in terms of dissecting the language. What I was saying, that we become language dissector, that is not that something negative, but it cannot only be language dissector. We
I
have
see.
to be sometimes bring social practice. We have sometimes to dissect language. This is part of our job. We have sometimes to put the sentence there and say, okay, what's happening here? This is first conditional. Okay, this is present perfect. And that's all right. This is not, we're not saying, okay, this is prohibited from now on. But the good thing of intensive reading is that give us the chance to work with specific abilities, specific skills, and inferring, as we were talking about, or trying to understand, like, are there numbers there? We can and there's I bring this idea of scaffolding in a more because they could be in both ways. I'm not saying that, okay, scaffolding is only for intensive reading, but I think what I'm trying to say is that in intensive reading, it's more explicit. The scaffolding is more explicit. Extensive reading is more implicit, because we're just giving them, as I said, when we ask them to draw an image, we are just trying to check what they understood. But when we are in intensive reading, I work more with abilities. I can get that short paragraph and say, okay, guys, so what, do we have numbers here? Can you find any verb? And I don't like, for example, when they just put the sentence and start asking questions about, when you're dissecting a rat, for example, like where's the heart, where's the kidney, stuff like that, because sometimes it's what we do with language. So we have to be very careful not to get that something that's live and then turn into something that becomes just words. So the intensive reading for specific aims, I could put this process of scaffolding in a more explicit way, because I can help them with, okay, so how, if I'm having difficulty in reading a text, so what should I do? So you could ask students to come with ideas and start creating this, scaffolding process with them. So I think scaffolding for me is just, it's a very interesting tool for us to organize the process. I think it's something for us to, it becomes more a visual when we think of scaffolding in the process, because then we say, okay, I want them to understand this, and what I can do backwards. There's also this discussion nowadays that, backwards lesson plan, backward design, something like this.
Backward
And
design, exactly. It's
I
based
was
on
like,
methods of learning.
yeah. When they come with this, I say, like, okay, this is pretty much what we did in the 80s with the scaffolding. Is because what we do, we just start thinking about what is behind, what could I do? What can I do here to help them understand this chunk here that I'm selecting from the story? So, and then I start planning backwards. It's like, okay, probably they're gonna have difficulty because this phrasal verb, it's not something is it's not easy to understand. It's very different from our language. So there's some words here that probably they are not familiar with. So then I start planning this, backwards in terms of what can I do. And this is the process of scaffolding, because scaffolding, you're there, thinking about how they can solve that problem throughout that process, when they're contact with a specific text. Yeah.
Professor, it's quite clear for me scaffolding in terms of intensive reading. So I could see clearly one text in the page. So I'm thinking about what the outcome would be and thinking how can I help them. For example, I see in many classes I visit, I observe lessons. I see teachers asking students to read the text out loud so the others can listen to the story or to that passage. And I come to the teacher and say, what's your aim when asking students to read out loud? Because I think it's very important to have that silent individual contact with the text, to see my difficulties, to see what I can infer from context. This is something very individual. So I should consider this also why when I'm planning my lesson, to leave the students alone with the student. As you said, when the student travels, we have contact with many types of text. So it should be okay to manage this anxiety and looking at the text and say, oh my God, I don't understand anything. So wait a minute, this I know, this I can recognize. So maybe, I see, I got 70% of the idea here. It's fine for the task I have now. I have a task I have to accomplish now. So it's quite clear for me. But in terms of extensive reading, I think this is a bit more complicated, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, and this is what you said about reading out loud is also a problem for me because if I read any text I read out loud, I don't know what I'm reading. If you give me a text right now and ask me, Adolfo, can you read it in Portuguese? I'm going to read the text, and then you guys ask me what the text talks about. I'm going to be like, okay, can you give me 5 minutes? Can I read in silence, and then I can talk about it. So I don't know why, because if you're talking about, I don't know, checking pronunciation or I don't know, something about oral skill, I can understand.
Let's say that for pronunciation, we have other types of exercises.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm just thinking about like why on earth you're gonna ask the students in terms of reading skills to read it out loud, because it makes it much harder for the students, and for any human being. So, but anyways, it happens. I understand what you said because it happens quite a lot. But getting to what you said in terms of scaffolding for extensive reading, this is something for us to think about as we're talking about. Okay, extensive reading is for enjoyment, but it's not for, as we're trying to point out here in the beginning, like it's not just for enjoyment, like without any direction. I mean, we are inside of the classroom. We are planning our lessons. I mean, it's good to read books and read. I like when students come to me and say, "Oh, I'm reading this book. In my vacation, I had a chance to buy this book, and I'm reading. I'm enjoying quite a lot." So this is one thing. But sometimes we create those, coffee discussions. When the students bring stories that has books they're reading stuff, but when we assign a book in the classroom, or we are working with a specific reader, I'm going to say in the classroom, we have some specific purposes for that. We then, even though it's a broader expectation, I would say we still have enjoyment, but the enjoyment for them to get autonomy, to use the skills. For example, you work with them in the intensive reading. So the skills you're talking about, inference, how to stories and then the sentences. This is something we pre-teach them, or we teach them when they go to extensive reading. So there is also a scaffolding process there, because I also, for example, as I said, how do we start presenting a reader to our students nowadays? As you said at the beginning, the difficulty of people reading. We also have this cultural question here in Brazil. So how do we motivate them for that reader? So that motivation, is going to come from, as I said, presenting that book in different languages, in terms of multimodality, videos and performance and stuff like that. So this is a scaffolding process already, because I'm trying to get my students, because we have to think that scaffolding, people, is not only about rules and getting the grammar exercise correct. Scaffolding
or teaching vocabulary. This is
or teaching vocabulary.
Give a list of new words and ask them to read a chapter.
Yes. So convincing our students to read that book, it needs to get into our scaffolding, because we need to think about, okay, what I'm going to do with them so that I can get them when they that I raise that curiosity for them to get home, or next class, be very excited about what's going to happen in chapter 2 of the story. So this should be in the process of our planning, and then that's going to get, for example, some abilities. As I said, for example, when you show an image, and you ask them to, can you read this image, which sometimes it feels very awkward, like we don't read the image. Can I see this image? No, we can read the image. Let's think about the language that's behind it. So this is also a scaffolding process for them to get to go there for that reading in a more pleasurable way, in terms of feel like I want to read the story, I want to know what happens. So this is part of the scaffolding, also. But maybe it's not so structured as you said in the intensive reading, as we can. It's more, I think, it's more implicit, yes, and then in the others more explicit.
Professor, now at this point of our conversation, I realize why you started talking about different types of things we read. We read the image, we read the video, we read the listening passage.
Mhm.
Yeah. So now it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
When you're saying that you nowadays use different types of languages
Mhm.
to reach the reading practice.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a favor now. So let's say I'd like you to give more examples of this in real life. So how can the teacher use these different types of language? And if you could give us examples, because you said image, you said TikTok, you said video, but do you have something fresh in mind to give us as an example, please?
Good question. Yes. Okay, I'm on the spot now. Okay. No, just
I have one more thing to say. We are
yeah.
almost finishing. We've got
Okay.
10 minutes. Okay,
Okay.
almost less than 10 minutes to finish. So I think we've got plenty of time.
Okay, good. So I think, Sergio, the first thing we should do is, get that reader home. Just thinking of the process of us, okay, I'm gonna have to work, or we have as you said, you have ebooks. Download that ebook, that's gonna work, and go through that story and go through the cover and try to understand that how that story, or how that ideas that are there can be expanded to the reality of our students. Because the biggest challenge for us nowadays is to bring, like, for example, nowadays we don't teach math without talking about where do you use math in our daily lives. So we don't teach biology anymore, just talking about memorization of stuff.
It's more than contextualization. It's
Yeah.
transfer, really.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing that I do a lot is just try to work to manipulate that material and see what comes to my mind in terms of, okay, maybe I'll choose a picture that could represent this book. I make my reading stuff, like, is there not, I'm not, we can also work with the cover, show the cover. We do this a lot. Show the cover and show the title and discuss with them. Okay. But we can do, we can expand this, or we can bring, for example, I remember once I got a piece, it was for beginners. And then I had a book that was talking about, nature. And I got some sounds of nature and I took to class. I was like, so let's see what happens here. Yeah. So, and then I put those sounds for them. And I was trying to ask, as I was asking them, like, okay, what comes to you? Ask them to close their eyes, like, ask them, like, what comes to your mind? Oh, this is a forest. And then I start, engaging them, what kind of forest that could be, and then I was leading them for that specific book, So as I said, we can, the engagement of a reader should not be, okay, guys, we're going to read this book here, and then this is part of our semester. Don't forget to bring the book next class, and we start chapter 1, and whatever, Mary's going to start reading the first chapter.
What's worse than that is, and we have a test.
A text, yes. We have a test at the end. You have to read the story because you have a test. This is even worse, because they just read because they want to pass, they just want to get a mark or something. This is not given the chance to um, get into the pleasure of reading. Because again, what's our challenge? They, as I said, they're reading TikToks, so they read things for short periods of time. This is something we've been discussing, psychology, sociology, and all kinds of stuff, like how much of our attention span we can, we tend to see. We now, even WhatsApp now, we put in different speeds because we cannot stand the normal speed of a human voice, so then we put to 1.52. So but this is the reality. We cannot say, okay, I don't want this, but this is our students getting to the classroom. So then the idea is just like how we can make them spend more time reading. And this could be, as you said, for example, this could be sometimes made in the classroom, like give them some silent moments and say, okay, I'm going to give you 15 minutes to read this part of the story in silence. And then I'm going to ask you some questions. So again, it's just a chance for them to get that challenge of looking into text and reading and dealing with those challenges and trying to use some of the skills you are teaching them. But I don't think there is only one recipe. But what I think the main core of all this should be making students better readers. And for us to become better readers, we first of all we need to like reading. So, and for us to make us students like reading, we have to create this environment of it should be a pleasant environment. It's not going about a test. It's not about a test. It's about reading, and understanding a specific story, understanding about what happens to that character. It's like when we watch TV series. What's going to happen in episode 2. So we could turn a book into series with them if we create this engagement in terms of curiosity and giving them, sometimes what I do also with students that, we live in the society of anxiety. I sometimes just give them just the first chapter and I just don't give them second chapter so that they can, when working with ebooks, it's easier sometimes to make it, or I make some games with them, like we cannot read chapter 2. So then we raise them the curiosity of going to chapter 2, or discussing like when we go to our TV series, to episode 2, 3, and 4. So there are many ways for us to do it, but one thing we have to do is connect with their reality. We cannot make like, okay, oh, I love reading, I read 10 books every year and everybody likes reading. No, people have difficulties, people don't like reading, and people struggle, and sometimes not something intentional. Sometimes you just struggle. Sometimes you just have some your attention is not there all the time. You cannot read some, as other students sometimes are very much into the creating that plot and imagining that situation, imagine that scenario. That's one thing we're also should dedicate some time for students, the work of imagination, because nowadays everything is so ready there. We see the videos, we see everything, so there's no much space for imagination. So when we're working with a book, when we start reading, remember when we start reading, what was the biggest thing that we liked reading? It was just because I could imagine situations. That's why sometimes we get so upset and becomes a film. Yes, because like, no, I didn't think of that character that way. I thought of that character in a different way, because there was the space for imagination. So maybe also asking students to come to that space of imagination. Sometimes you can work for a longer period of time in the classroom. Imagine the story without starting with the book, bringing text from other places, from other places, work with their imagination, and then bringing the book for them to read over the weekend. And they're going to read it because they're going to be so curious about
Exactly.
everything you put in their, in their imagination about that story. So
Great.
I think that's the challenge, but it's not easy. You're just talking about sometimes we speak as, oh, this is very easy, and they're going to say, oh, I don't think it's very. No, it's not easy. But I think we have to always find space to put different perspectives into something very important, that's reading. Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to tell you something. At the very beginning of our conversation, I talked about uh, ideas that we could have to have better readers. I'd like to say that I'd like to have better and happier
Yeah.
readers. after
Exactly.
you see that we have evidence of learning, but
Yeah.
we need evidence of happiness as well,
Yeah.
to
Exactly.
feel that they are happy and enjoying the process. Professor, thank you very much for your participation. It was really, really nice sharing with you these ideas about reading, and I'm sure that teachers, after listening to you, will be ready to experience with new things. Thank you very much. And I'd like to say that our remember to check the chat here for our link with the customer satisfaction survey and certificate. Okay. Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye bye.